Hello, everybody. My name's Peter Buckingham from Spectrum Analysis. We would like to think we are one of the main ones now in doing demographics and mapping for schools and talking about all sorts of data that you can use to make better business decisions and your future going forward. I would like to thank Sue Elson, who's helping me do this. Sue is also a guru on LinkedIn for schools. You may have met her on other reasons and other issues. We're also, just so you know, before we start the presentation, we are attending the AHESA conference next week, and we'll also be at the Educate Plus conference with a stand at both in South Australia. So some of you that may be on here, we may meet you live for a drink or whatever over the next couple of months. The AHESA one is next week. Okay, I'm just going to bring up my screen share. Let's start. Okay, so just to give you a little bit of detail, I'm the Managing Director of Spectrum Analysis and have been for over 20 years now. And we would like to think we're fairly strong in two areas. One is schools and the other is franchise businesses. And we're actually awarded the FCA, Franchise Council of Australia, Supplier of the Year this year. So we're having quite a big run, and we just attended the National Franchising Convention last few days. But we're now totally into schools, which is the other half of our business. I was the founder of this and have been around for a while. And Sue is, as I mentioned, going to handle the chats and help us in any way she can, which is she drives it all. We'll take any questions, happy to handle them however which way you want to do that. But there is a chat box there, of course. Okay, so I guess the outcomes of what we're trying to help people do is to help schools, and we'll say colleges and universities, because the same logic always applies, understand a lot more about their students. So we like to find out what sort of students are attending independent schools, understand the demographics of the local area, the socioeconomic status, the religious affiliations, population forecasts, who's going to be there in years to come, and other data that really help you with making good business decisions for your school. So the first thing I want to touch on is most schools always say to me they have a strategic plan. Some say it's a 5-year plan, might be a 2-year plan. Doesn't really worry me. But basically, the strategic plan is normally at a board level. And most boards, if they are business people involved, they will insist that normal business practice is to have a plan. And firstly, a lot of our work and what we find is many of these strategic plans can be quite soft. You know, we're going to teach a bit more religion, or we're going to change the way we think, and we're not going to bully each other so much, or whatever the story is. We're all about putting hard numbers behind that strategic plan. How many kids are at the school? How many are likely to be there in years to come? What is the drawdown of children from your major catchment area, your minor catchment area? We're all about trying to put hard numbers behind it so that a proper business plan can be drawn on that. The second part of that is a lot of schools say they have a marketing plan as well. And quite often, well, what's the marketing plan? And it can be very soft. Again, our aim is to try and help people understand that. So even if it's as simple as the marketing plan is to have 10 bus shelters with your school's name and details in it, then the first question is, well, where are you going to put those bus shelters and why? And that's, to me, when you start having a marketing plan. So we're all about making the quantitative part of it, not the qualitative. If you wish to have focus groups about how people feel about the school, that's lovely. It's just not our bread and butter. Our thing is hard numbers. We want to know how many people live, how many students live nearby, whether that number's going up or down, what market share you have of that, and how we can improve that to meet whatever the school's long-term aims and plan may be. And that could also be looking at where other campuses are likely to be located, may even be the school may want to invest in some early learning centres. Any of that type of thing where it needs hard numbers to justify it is our bread and butter. and what we do for you. So there are a lot of quantitative components, hard numbers we can use, and I'll start going through those in a minute. So it's really what information should a school consider, and I hopefully will have time to just touch on a mapping system we use, and we basically put it into every school we work with so that the school, it so much more becomes a DIY part after we've done the initial project, that if the headmaster, the principal or someone, anyone at the school that you give the password to wants to know things like what's the growth in this area or what's the socioeconomic score of another area, they can go in and do it. And we'll show you a bit of an example of that hopefully near the end. So this data I'm going to talk about is publicly available. So there is no, it is mainly ABS data, but when I say publicly available, it can be a bit hard to find, and we find it so much better if we have it in a mapping setup so you can easily use it. You can have fantastic spreadsheets and huge amounts in Excel, but it gets pretty hard to try and add 3 or 4 postcodes together to get a score or whatever you're wanting to do, which is the reason we really push for a mapping interface that makes it so much more easier to operate. The first thing I'm going to start on with is socioeconomic index for areas. I'll talk about that in a minute. The census, and just a lot of people are asking me at the moment, when is the next census coming out? So we all did our census in August 2021, and the release date at this stage is June 2022. Now, I always say to people, when we do our projects, there's 3 major data sets, and the census is only one of those things. And to me, it's probably the second most important, not the first. I'll talk about that in a second. So census gives us a really good look at who attends the schools, whether children are attending government school, independent school or Catholic school, whether they're at primary school or secondary, and even male and female. So that gives us a really good picture looking backwards. The ABS population projections to me are probably the most important because they tell us what's going to happen. So every 5 years, the ABS put out some data, and we love that, and it's now out to 2032. The last part of this that we'll touch on is the ACARA data in my schools, and that again is public data. So when we have the data, which I'm going to describe, that we can use, we obviously match that in with data that the school can provide us. So most schools can provide us 2022 students, date of birth, address, feeder school, and we have all sorts of privacy things and passwords for things we do. So we can get a very good picture from you, your students. We normally can get a bit of a picture of past students, and sometimes we actually ask to have that in either 2016 or 2021. And the reason of that is the years of the previous census. So if we know every student and where exactly they lived in 2016, let's say, we can look at, from the other data, how many students were at independent school in 2016 from that small area and see what market share you have. And it obviously, that can change, it can fluctuate. A new family join the school or drop away when you get into smaller areas further out. But in the big areas, the main catchments, you really start to be able to see where your market share is. School also can provide us future enrolments. And we've done ones right through to seeing everything to do with their date of birth, what year they're going to attend, which year they're going to go into at the school at that point. All that sort of data, and sometimes we'll have the mapping showing by year, like here are the kids coming in 2023, here are the kids coming in 2024, and actually seeing them on the map. Some schools like to have alumni, whichever way we want to say it, my Latin part of me. The point of that is you can get some big schools. We've done ones like Haileybury, and where you have 4 or 5 campuses, if you plot all the alumni, you can start seeing where you might have the annual dinner and things of that nature, and what areas the past students have come from. The last part that your information that gets very valuable and we like to use is bus lines and students that use them. Now, I think some of the biggest schools we've dealt with, literally have a tender of over $1 million a year for their bus lines. So it's a huge part of your spending. Now, how good is it to be able to actually see every bus route and actually be able to light up which children are on the bus compared to which ones aren't? Maybe it helps you think about we should move from a 12-seater to a 20-seater in that area. Maybe we've got to ring a few extra parents and make sure they're aware the bus is running just near the bottom of their street. Or we actually might need to change a few of the bus routes because we can now see where the children are living compared to where our bus is running. So a lot of our work, we're finding it, people get tremendous value out of seeing the bus lines and which students are on the bus or which ones aren't. So I'm going to start talking about some of this information that is available. So SEIFA stands for Socioeconomic Index for Areas. And it's a government ABS-produced data set that means for every area in Australia, there is a score. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Average live at a score of about 1,000. I think now it might have moved to about 1,005, but the most average people in Australia live there. So that would be whatever the middle income, all those things. Now, why SEIFA is great is it compares apples to apples. So it can compare an area in... It's terrible, isn't it? Compare an area in Sydney to an area in Melbourne. I can compare Toorak in Melbourne to Bellevue Hill in Sydney to Windsor in Brisbane to Nedlands in Perth. But we have a way of comparing apples to apples. So a lot of people say, when we're going to do socioeconomic, we'll just look at average household income. That's a great starting point. And the very nice people at the ABS probably start with that. But then they bring in factors like what's the price of the house? What's the level of unemployment? Other socioeconomic factors. So they give a consistent score for every area in Australia. And this comes right down to SA1, Standard Area 1, of which there's 51,000 SA1s in Australia. And we rarely go to that level. It's too small. An average SA1 has about 400 to 800 people. But SA1s become SA2s, and I believe there's about 2,300 SA2s across Australia, and that compares well with about 2,600 postcodes across Australia. So the beauty of this is whether it's SA1, suburb, postcode, we can look at any area and compare apples to apples as far as what the socioeconomic is. Now, I think every independent school would have a pretty smart way of thinking that the higher the socioeconomic, the higher percentage of children are going to attend independent school. The lower the socioeconomic, probably more likely to be at the government school and maybe some very low fee schools. So we will talk in a minute and look at a couple of examples where we can actually see what the socioeconomic is and what the percentage of students attending different types of schools are. So this is even so important that when government talk about things like in Victoria, what areas are allowed to have poker machines, this was the way they actually defined what areas, which local government areas were allowed to have poker machines and which ones they were trying to reduce based on the SEIFA score of that area. And it was written into legislation accordingly. So SEIFA, very important way of looking for socioeconomic of any area. So the second one I want to touch on is, how that can affect. So now we go to the census. And in the census, you might recall every person was asked whether they had children, whether they went to school, whether a boy or girl, whether they went to primary school or preschool, primary school or secondary school, and then whether they went to government school, Catholic school or independent school. The net effect of that is we can look at any area and see how many children are going to, I'll concentrate here on independent schools, but I do realise we could have some Catholic schools involved. And we have done big Catholic schools like Xavier in Melbourne, Joey's in Sydney. We've done Padua, which is a big one down the Mornington Peninsula. So obviously they're a bit more interested probably in the Catholic side, whereas most independent schools are looking at the independent side. The first thing this tells us, and it's census-based data, this is Census 2016, and this is the thing we will get our hands on in June when the new census comes out. And we will be able to also tell longitudinally what's changed from, say, 2011 to 2016 to 2022, 2021 for any area. So let me just run through this. This is Mosman in Sydney, very high socioeconomic area, 1165, top area. So we can see how many children, males and females, were at preschool, how many at primary school by categories. And you can see here it was quite a lot of independent, more than high economic, obviously. And then when we get to secondary, we can see again how many males, females are at government, Catholic or independent school. And why that's quite handy is you may be a girls' school or a boys' school, you can actually centre down onto these numbers. We then do a computation, which is in all of our mapping, and we say, okay, what is the percent at primary school? So in Mosman, 48% of children went to government school, 16% went to Catholic, and 36% went to independent. And then in secondary school, it was 22, 20, and 58. Now, that's getting up there. Some of the highest ones, like Vaucluse in Sydney and Toorak in Melbourne, probably hit up near 80% of the population are actually going to an independent school. So every area, anywhere in Australia, we can look at this and get those sort of numbers. Now, the second example, and I'm just trying to see where it is, it's not showing under my thing, but it's a low socioeconomic in Sydney, and it's 937. So if you remember my bell graph from previously, I think I can just walk back there, it's sitting somewhere here. Now, by the time you're in the capital cities, by the time you're out here is where you're starting to really hit up into the country. But most capital cities tend to be between a sort of a 900 to the top. So Sydney, even the lower socioeconomic areas, just because of the price of houses and things, are probably at a bit over around the 890, 900. So this is a lower socioeconomic area. First thing we can see, how many males, females at government school, Catholic school and independent, how many then in secondary at those levels. And you can see here that it went from 65, 23 and 12 to 76, 16 and 7. Now that's really quite unusual. Two things unusual. One is that the actual percentage at independent school dropped, and normally that will go up. But quite often, if there's a few big Muslim schools there, the people are more likely to, and they register as independent schools, they're more likely to have their children there in primary school, and maybe they move them off to the high school or whatever. But often when we see that effect, it's normally influenced by the Muslim schools. Much more normal in areas that aren't so high in Muslim is that will then kick up to a bit higher, as some parents obviously send their children to government school up to year 6 or something, and then move them up to onto an independent school. Point of that is this can be seen for any area, anywhere we want in Australia. And obviously we take that into account when we're talking about some of these high growth areas. May look fantastic. The area is going to go ballistic with population. But if the percentage is right down in that sort of, might have 1,000 more kids coming on in the next few years, or 10,000 if I'm talking about Marsden Park, but it might only represent 700 more children going to independent school. Middle of Australia, that's normally around an 18 or 20% at independent school. Obviously, the higher socioeconomic here and the lower one there. But we have done quite a bit of work of looking at what percentage that is compared to the CEFA score, and because of some of the work we've done for AIS New South Wales and some of those government applications for funds, we actually did some modelling about what we would predict an area would be in the percentage going to independent school based on the CEFA score. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about is, and I said there was the most important thing I felt that the ABS provide us for schools, and this is population projection. So the government every 5 years, and it came out in October 2019, give us what they expect the population by male, female is going to be by age group, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, 15 to 19, etc., etc. Now, I actually spoke yesterday at the National Franchising Convention on the effects of COVID on population and strategic planning. We've all got our stories about that, and I remember schools we've done up on the Sunshine Coast have gone ballistic and totally filled their numbers. But that is a bit of the exception. Please don't think that Melbourne and Sydney are just emptying out and everybody's going to Queensland. And in fact, after all these rains, maybe a whole lot of people will want to come back to Melbourne and Sydney, but I'm not the one to guess on that. The truth is, both Melbourne and Sydney are expected, they dropped 0.8%, under 0.8%. So if there are 120 people in your immediate friends, one of them probably has moved to somewhere else. So the numbers showed, I think Queensland were up 55,000 people and Melbourne was down 20,000 and Sydney 25, numbers like that. The point is, it is small, but everyone will have a case. But the bigger thing that I think is happening is, and everyone I talk to tells me it's this phone call from someone whose child's in year 2 or year 3 at the local government school, and they want to move them into the independent school at year 5. They want to get them in there earlier than they otherwise were going to. And that's John Somerset. We do a lot with Somerset Education. He tells me it's a number like 5% that independent schools are up. Just, we all thought it might have gone down as a bit of unemployment, but we've obviously gone through COVID very well. And the preference for people to go to independent school is up. So that's probably why you're all having a great run on new students at this point in time, but it's not huge migration. And in fact, Bernard Salt spoke at the conference I was at the other day, and he pointed out to us the actual population. Australia normally grows about 250,000 a year, and it went down 90,000 in 2020. So in other words, 90,000 more people left the country than arrived, but it's already come back and it's expected to keep growing. But on a state-by-state basis, sure, there is a little bit of coming out of Victoria, maybe coming out of Sydney, heading up into Queensland, but it might look like a lot if you're sitting in a town in Queensland or on the Sunshine Coast, population of 250,000 and another couple of thousand or a few thousand people turn up. But as far as Melbourne and Sydney is concerned, it's really only a drop in the ocean and it's not going to change too much. So when we're talking population projection, the ABS aren't actually talking of updating these figures. We've gone and checked with them, said, look, you're going to do an update on the October 19 figures. They've said, no, hardly making a difference. We're not going to lose sleep about it. So the two things that we have in our web-based mapping that we think is most important for schools is firstly just a general picture. So general picture, and I'm using one Nelson Bay for a really specific reason. So Nelson Bay, as a lot of people may know, is just north of Sydney, north of Newcastle, and it's seen as a bit of a retirement sort of area. So in population, it's actually expected to go from 21,800 to 24,700. So it's going to grow by 13% or 2,926 people over that 15 years. So that's not bad. That's pretty much sort of a bit lower than Australia grows in general, but not too bad. But the point of this exercise is when we go looking at school age, we look at it this way. We start off, we go in and we say, let's look in 2017, and we'll probably dump that soon and just start at 2022. It's gone for a year or two. Let's look at 0 to 4s, 5 to 9s, 10 to 14s, 15 to 19s. We have a number. Then let's see what the ABS believed it would be in 2022, 2027, 2032. Now, a bit general here, but let's just say 0 to 4 when considering aren't school-age children. And you could argue that we should only use 5 to 18, not 5 to 19. And there's a lot of bits on that. You could argue which way you want to go. There's probably counting 14 years where you might say a preppy to year 12 is 13 years. But I'm just wanting to be consistent. The point is here, we drop the 0 to 4s. They're not at school. And then we look at what those numbers are when we add. So 3540 is probably the sum of that plus that plus that. And 3388 is the sum of 9 there, and there. So this area that's actually going to grow by 13% in school-age children is expected to drop by 4%. So it's actually going to have probably 152 less school-age children by 2032 than it had in 2017. And you can do a quick arithmetic there. It's probably going to be down. It's 25, it'll be down by about 127 from 2022 to 2032. So does that mean you'd go and make a major investment and double the size of your school or whatever you're thinking of doing? Probably not. But that's the sort of data we can get for every area in Australia. So I know when the AIS New South Wales had this $60 million distribution they've done, we're involved in 6 of those projects. They had to have a professional demographic company do it. And firstly, it was the charter was obviously growth areas. They wanted the government to subsidise and help schools in growth areas. And to us, and we spoke this very clearly with the AIS New South Wales, that our view is this is the best national set of data. Now, some states will come in and say, oh, we've got data out to 2045 and different things like that. Sure. But the point I make is this is the national set of data done by the ABS, not by, let's just say, maybe a little bit politically guided government in a certain state that wants to look that they're growing a bit more than they may be. At the end of the day, the ABS have to filter through all that and balance it against migration for Australia and all these sorts of things. So to us, that's the gold level when we're talking about what's the growth is forecast in any specific area around Australia. Just to give you an idea of a couple like that, this is Truganina, which is the Werribee area of Melbourne. And I could almost duplicate the look of this with Marsden Park in Sydney. So just to give you the ideas, it's starting at 2017 and those sort of numbers. You can even see in 2017, high amount of younger, then it's dropping, then dropping, then dropping. Because, you know, mum and dad have got there, they now had kids, the kids are young. And it's continual like that the whole way through because these areas are growing incredibly and the 0 to 4s are just more of them all the time and they then wash through as they age on. The massive part about this one is by the time we dump off the preschoolers, it's going to go from 5,241 children, estimate 2017. Probably now it's about 9.6 and it'll be 18,725 expected by 2032, up 13,000 children. So 257%. So let's say the average, I'm just saying average school's 1,000. I'm sure I can find a better number, but let's call it that. This area needs about 13 new schools. Now, you only have to think about it and say, well, it's a middle to lower socioeconomic area. It probably was averaging best part of that 18% of kids going to some independent school, mainly lower fee independent school. But even at that, it probably needs 2 or 3 new independent schools in that area in the next 10 years. And it'll probably get 5 or 6 government schools and 2 or 3 Catholic schools. But that's the sort of numbers, the forecast of school-aged children to come through, increasing over the period. Now, this is a bit like my argument for Port Stephens. This is the Roseville area in Melbourne. And I often describe these areas, and I see a lot of them. They're typically that area that was developed 30, 40 years ago. You know, it was paddocks, all the houses went in progressively. Mum and dad bought, had the kids grew up, kids have moved on. Mum and dad are still there, empty nesting. And the other part of this is the average household population, the average number of people in a household is dropping and has for years. So you actually get the effect of a very stable area like Roseville, where probably no new houses have been built in 20, 30 years. They're all a brick veneer and that type of house from 30, 40 years ago. And what you find out of those areas is the actual number of school-aged children is dropping still. It's down 202 children from 2017 to 2032. Another area in Melbourne is the Mill Park area. There are a few of them up in Sydney in the same vein. Did some work recently, the Duncraig sort of area in Perth. They're lovely areas. It's just that nothing's really changed and the value of the land hasn't grown so that people are knocking down a house and building 3 units or building different types of housing. It's just financially the stable sort of house is what you've got is what you're going to stay with for the life of that house, which is probably 50 or 60 years. So you get these areas that They might look good, yeah, they're full, but the actual number of children are dropping and expected to drop over quite a long period of time. Okay, so the other another part of publicly available housing is publicly available data is enrolment data. So in the My Schools, the CARA sort of data, we can look up any school in Australia and see what were their enrolments in 2020 and back to what were their enrolments in 2008. Now, I hope Prince Alfred don't mind. They're going well. There's no argument with that. So they're up 16%. You can see it's gone from 956 to 1116. There is a little catch in this that we believe they don't count ELCs. Not even quite certain they count what you call primary. I think they try to be consistent Australia-wide. So they count grade 1 to year 12 years worth of students. Because normally when we talk to a school and we say, look, that's what's in the ACARA data, they say, oh, no, we've got another, 40 kids or something. And it normally is this bit of a minor discussion of where the measurement starts, primary or not. So this data tells us, obviously, the number of children. And we've just set it up so we can see what the increase has been from the base of 956 up to 1116. It's up 16.7%. So probably they're very happy with that and there's no issue. And it tells us whether it's boys or girls or what percentage of boys and girls. And it also gives us how many teachers and how many full-time equivalent teaching staff and full-time equivalent non-teaching staff. Now, John Somerset's a great mate of ours. He's all about benchmarking, comparing yourself to others, knowing what your school's like, and using the Somerset education system. You pull up a group of 10 similar schools to yourself and you can see how you sit on some of this data. I'm just making the point that you can actually go and see how you are against any school you want to by just looking at this data. The second one, and I don't think we bothered to put a name beside it. Now, this is, some school that you may say could have a couple of problems. It's gone from 1111 down to 935. So their enrolments are down 15.8%. Now, I don't think you have to be a genius to sort of say that'd be a bit of a worrying sign. Maybe they're in one of those type of areas that the kids' numbers are dropping a bit, but there has to become a point where certain things you're doing, some class sizes become a bit iffy, all that type of thing. This one actually is, you can see that, it's a girls' school. And actually, I've written an article that's going to come out in the next AHISA magazine, which does talk about this issue about co-ed schools versus pure boys schools and pure girls schools, and how it's quite an issue, especially in Melbourne, where quite a lot of boys schools went co-ed and didn't happen the other way from the girls schools. So some of the girls schools are under pretty extreme pressure, but not only are they competing purely on the girls' side, it's quite often some of the big private schools that are now co-ed playing in their space. Doesn't matter what the story is here. All I want to show you is that this data is available for any school you want. So obviously your own school's of interest to you, but if you want to know what's happening around you and your competitive schools, you can see this, including every Catholic school, every government school. And we've actually set it up in a big table so you can just copy paste the school, or we can copy paste the school we're looking at, and this table just produces straight out as the next page on the spreadsheet. So that's very handy information when you're sort of wondering what's happening to you and what's happening to other schools around you. As I said, it's publicly available knowledge. There's no issue there. It's published by the government. Okay. While I'm talking demographics, I just want to give an example, and it's a school we've obviously worked with. And we like to look at areas. Firstly, we'll say, what is the major catchment area of that school? So once we've mapped all the children, we'll probably say, look, it becomes pretty obvious looking at a map. It probably represents where about 60 or 70% of the children are what we'll call come out of the major catchment area. You then go a bit wider and you get a bit of a minor catchment area. Now that tends to be often the newer growth areas that are happening where kids are starting to come in from there. But what I want to show you more was what the data we can do with that. So first thing is our major catchment area. We can start off by saying, what's the total population? What is the population of 5 to 18-year-olds, and how is that as a percentage? Now, what is the growth of that total population in that area? What is their forecast growth comparing of the 5 to 18-year-olds? What is the CIFA of that area? So in a high or middle or low socioeconomic. And just from census data, we can pull very easily. Sometimes people like to know average household income. It's something a bit more realistic to most people in a theoretical CIFA score. And then what is the average age of the population? Are we in a younger area, an older area? Now, average age, as you can see as we go across, average age of Sydney, 37.9, average age of Australia, 38.6. So 38.5, that's average. But that tells us a starting point for this area. And I don't remember what school it is, but obviously it's in a very high socioeconomic. Now, we think about the next area out, which is their minor catchment, often the area they're likely to get things in the future. Again, the minor catchment might have a bit of a similar age. It only has 10.68% of the children are in that area, in that age group. It's expected the total population up 25, the percentage of children aged going to grow 31, very similar on CIFA, very similar on income and age. Now, if we go to Greater Sydney, so I guess Greater Sydney to us is basically Newcastle to Wollongong and out to Penrith. So Greater Sydney, about 5.6 million people. So Sydney itself is about 4.5 million people. Melbourne, on the other hand, is about 4.2 or 4.3. And Melbourne's actually was expected to pass Sydney about 2026 of the actual city of Sydney and the city of Melbourne. But COVID might have slowed that down a little further. But they're both similar, 4 and a bit million. But we call Greater Sydney Newcastle to Wollongong, and therefore you can see the comparison. Population 16% is the number for percentage of 5 to 18-year-olds. Going to grow by about 27.93 in the total population, 26% in the school age. 1032 is the average of Sydney. As I said, Sydney will be a higher midpoint for the CIFA score. Melbourne probably averages more like 1020 or 10, just over 1,000. Adelaide's probably the lowest of all the main capitals, probably about 980. Brisbane's probably about 1,000. Perth probably just on 1,000. But this is partly because of the price of housing. But it gives us a way that we can now compare our area. And then obviously we've brought out New South Wales here and we've brought total Australia. And I think I said to you, Mr and Mrs Average in Australia live at a CIFA of 1004. Now that's because you can be out the back of Alice Springs or something like that and you're getting scores in the 700s and 800s and things like that. But it gives us a way of being able to compare what we'll call a major catchment, minor catchment against the capital, the city you're involved in against the state in Australia. So that really gives a good picture of the demographics, so a starting point to work with. So I guess I want to talk about what value we can achieve. So obviously we can understand the mapping and where current students come from. We can look at future students, where are they going to come from based on your future enrolments. And we can sometimes do that in a couple of stages. You may even say, look, we get the name of a person who turns up for an open day. We then get a second level when they actually contact us and give us their name and address and want to talk to us. And then we get a third level when they pay a deposit. But no reason why we can't have a different coloured dot for each of those stages in your enrolment process. So you can then say, well, look, we just want to look at the ones that have actually signed on the dotted line, paid a deposit, or we just want to see the ones that are coming to open days or however you collect your data. It's all very flexible. We can identify the future growth areas and often where to market. And sometimes that can be a long process. You know an area is going to grow. I remember something we did not long ago with the Ellenbrook area in Perth. Now, that's been growing for a long time and it's going to keep growing. So if you're a school nearby there, it may be you start off putting some of those ad shields out in that area. The new railway line's actually going to go there. That's going to make it easier for children to get into schools now. So just thinking about where you'd market and why. Obviously, you'd start off in the growth areas, and you probably wouldn't bother going to the Rosevilles and the Port Stephens and things like that if you were trying to, on a bit of a growth curve. And similarly, when you start running buses into those areas, when is there a realistic plan to do that? Now, I had one school recently, and they thought they were going to pick up an area in Sydney, which was a long way away. And if I had been a parent, if I'd been a kid and my parents expected me to get on the bus and sit for an hour or so to get to school and vice versa, I wouldn't have been real happy. But at that point in time when we did some work, I think there were 3 kids on the bus. Now, hopefully the bus was only an 8-seater or 12-seater, but my suggestion was cancel the bus and pay for an Uber. I think 2 of the kids were from one family and 1 was from somewhere else. So it'd be much cheaper paying for an Uber every day to and from the school than trying to run a bus. But these are the things that huge amount of money involved. And when you can sort of think of those sort of terms, you can make much better decisions. So the bus route's obviously a big part. And our view always has been, if you understand the available information, you're going to make much more informed decisions. And I'll just fall back on that bus one. There's a bit of a legendary story of a school who once asked the bus driver what he did, and he gave the story. He starts here at 7:45 and then he drives to this next point by about 10 to 8, and first kids get on the bus. Similarly, going home, drops the last kids off, then drives the last step. Someone sort of asked, well, how long has that been going on? Oh, about 5 years ago, those kids had started getting on, no longer on the bus. So that school had been paying for the first leg and last leg of a bus with no kids on it for about 5 years. And, when I talk to schools about the buses, without trying to be overly critical, when we get things going, they all admit to me it's normally the first time they've actually seen it clearly in a nice, easy way to be able to do something with it. So hopefully that adds a lot of value and benefit or saving. I always say, the business manager normally isn't the one that loves these projects until you can tell him there's a big saving involved, and then you obviously can get their attention. I'm going to jump on to mapping for schools. So as I said, we tend to provide data for schools however they want it. Normally becomes part of a project, and most of the schools we deal with then say, we really want to keep this mapping going, and every year they then update it. You say, give us the next year of students, give us your update all your future student enrolments, and we put all that together, and we'll update the census data, population projections, the CFAs, all our stuff, the ACARA data, all of that we get publicly. And when you bring the 2 things together every year, you can then be updating it, and makes it a lot easier. Sometimes I know schools where the headmaster grabs the principal grabs the login, and if it does no more, that they can answer their own questions. It probably saves you people a lot of hassle. Let me just see if I can jump over to the school mapping. Just a little example. Okay, hopefully we're seeing a map now. Okay, this is a free one that's on our website, and this school does not exist, right? We made it up. Do not get anybody worried that we're taking anybody's confidentiality and blowing it out of the water. We invented, we call it Gels College. So it's near Gels Park in Glen Waverley in Melbourne. The simple thing of this, it's a really simple system. You start off with a legend. If in doubt, go back to the legend. Oh, what are the colours on the CFA scores? You can see what they are. Various things, what's the colours that relate to the population density increases, things like that. So once you've done it a couple of times, you don't need to know about it, but it's there. Most important thing is called layers. And it's as simple as this. If it's grey, it's off. If it's blue, it's on. So I'll start with everything off except my little school, which is sitting somewhere there. There's colours, they'll come up now. I must have some bus routes, I'm going to kill them as well. Okay, so school should be here somewhere. There it is, Gels College, invented by us. First thing I can do is bring up the 2020 enrolments. So hopefully all the dots. And depending what level of confidentiality we believe you should have the name and everything on there. So we made these ones up. Jane, if you're listening, I think we used names out of my LinkedIn theoretical. We gave the person a name, a birthday, what suburb they lived in. In most cases, we have their address, we can have the school they came from, what year they're in, whatever data you want. Now, some schools especially say, no, we just want the identifier. But I had one recently in Adelaide and they said, oh no, confidentiality, we just want the identifier, we don't want the name. A month later, they came back and said, too hard, put the names back on. And this is all under very strong security. And if somebody leaves who has the access, you only have to ring us. Within 2 minutes, probably we will have changed the password to something else you want. And you can't suck the data out of these systems. You might be able to go and find a name of a kid or something, but it's not anything that I have any fear about. So the first thing is that we can pick up whoever the child's name is. We can also go and look at all the future enrolments. When they're in dot form, you can have both there. So now we're going to still have the dark blue dots of the name of the kids that go into the school and the light blue dots. It's just taking a bit to download. Now, that looks pretty messy. I might just get rid of the current students and just leave the light blue dots on. We made our school look like a very busy little school, I've got to say, and put a lot of dots on it. And again, you can go in there and say, Phil Tanky lives in Wanturna South, year 6. We could say what school he's coming from and what year he's coming into our school. So every child can be set up. And as I said, we've had ones where we've actually had a separate layer for each year they're going to come on. Now, I'll just leave that up. But what I want to bring down and show you is two things. One is this population increase material. So I'm going to bring up, we have it at SA2, Standard Area 2, or Standard Area 3. Now, why I've got it at both is when we had to do some of the government things, government like to talk in Standard Area 3, which is more like a local government area, a bigger area. But in this case, I just want to target at Standard Area 2, which is similar to a postcode. So again, if you say, what are the colours? All we have to do is jump on the legend, come down, and we'll pick up somewhere in here saying it's population density. It's these sort of colorations here, the greens through to the brown. So let's just leave it at layers. So what we'll do is we can jump on any of that one, just click on it, and up's going to come that thing I showed you a minute ago, including all the population estimates and how many more kids are going to come out of that area. Now, that colour is the middle colour. We do things in quintiles, so 1 to 5. So the top areas will be dark. So this is the area of Mount Waverley South. It's going to grow by 32%. We're probably sorted by that. And it's going to grow by 1,178 kids. This area here, that's Knoxfield, going to grow by 49% or 1,530 children. And then if we go over to that brown area, which will pop in a sec, it'll be the lowest. But hopefully what it shows you is we can look at any area of what the potential of children is. We've actually blocked this so it can't go out any wider just because it's our own little example. And because some of the schools we've worked for are directly nearby, we thought, well, we need to block it. So this is the lowest area. It's only going to grow by 7 children over this side of, so I think you can get the picture there pretty quickly. Wanturna South, one of those areas, like I mentioned, Roseville, Wanturna South, they were developed years and years ago. Let's just throw up the bus routes. So I was working my way around it. I used it for a little while, this one. So bus routes should be down here somewhere. Sorry, Sue's just giving me the official finger to tell me we're going to have to finish soon. Sorry, I can't just pick it up on school day. I'll get the bus routes in a sec. But I just want the other one I like to show you is that information I talked about called school data. And this is where we actually touch on the census data that tells us how many children came out of each area. So here's my Mount Waverley South. we're seeing that, again, it had a CEFA score of 1080, so a bit above average, just a bit above average, and it had 29% of the children going to independent school at secondary and 8% at primary. So we start seeing how that relates. If we go to Glen Waverley, 18%. Now, this is pretty middle suburbia. Actually has quite a high Asian percentage around there, 1066, bit above average. Glen Waverley East. So you're seeing numbers like this, sort of 20% going to independent school. The other one I had touched on is the CEFA. So if I bring up we actually have it set up right down to SA1s, which is 53,000 SA1s across Australia. We can see right down to which are the higher socioeconomic areas and which are the lower ones in these areas based on the census data. So higher around these darker blues, so the lower is the red. And it just can be affected by a few houses or something's hunting tower schools there. So probably a lot of the pupils live nearby. Again, you only have to click on it and it'll tell you what that score is. 1128 there, whereas here that's probably in a major shopping centre, 994. Here it's 1051. So you can get a very quick feeling of what the socioeconomic is at SA1, right down to low areas. And if we just bring that up to SA2s, which is SA1 form into SA2s, we should be able to see the main areas around it. Okay, so these areas are the light blue, which is our second percentile. These areas here are the middle, 1055, whereas these ones are more like 1066, 1082, 1081. So again, we can look at any area across anywhere in Australia about what their socioeconomics are. Okay, now I'm going to just take that out. And what I'd like to do is, I don't think there's anything particularly more on my slides I need to deal with. We're just, again, a little bit of geocoding and mapping that I've talked about. This was actually something at Cronulla. You can see the dots on the map and they look pretty messy, pretty hard to interpret what the difference is. The next slide actually shows us colours of, that's the higher density, then the light blue is the next. And this would be, let's say we wanted to do some marketing in our area. Well, we probably think, why haven't we not got many people coming out of here, yet we do out of here? Maybe we need an ad shield or a bus thing, or go and drop some flyers into some of these areas. But just a good way of seeing things. I'm also going to say that today we're going to do a draw at the end, and we're offering what we call geomapping level 3. This is something we do with Somerset Education, and geomapping level 3 allows you to look all over Australia at the demographic components of your area and every other area. So you can see all those things I've talked about, like how many, what the CEFA scores is, what the population growth is going to be, and how many kids go to independent school and all that, just all over Australia. Somerset Education have it. If you are a Somerset school, you can get this at a reduced rate just by clicking on John Somerset's menu of what you book in for each year. We highly recommend it and obviously push for it.
Peter, so, I'd just like to mention that we have chosen someone for the prize.
Okay, so who is the lucky winner?
And the lucky winner is Belinda Mears from St Ignatius College in Adelaide.
Oh, congratulations. We will be in contact with you and just give you the logins and passwords and show you what you need to do, or what you can do if you'd like a quick lesson on it, but that'll give you a good way of having a look around, all around your area. Okay, so I'm happy to take any questions. Sue, has anything come through on our, let me kill this.
Yes, it has. Thank you, Peter. There's lots of detail in there, and I'll make sure that we also send the link to the Gels College Play Around so that people who've registered for this webinar can have a little play. Now, Michael has asked, what mapping platform do you use? And I think it's Mango Maps, but I thought I'd just get the voice.
No, it's not actually. It's, at the moment we're using, I guess you'd call it the back end of a Google Maps type of setup. But in a lot of our work, we do use one called Mango Maps, and we do things like the other part of our business, spectrum analysis, main business. We do F45 training, which a lot of you may know of. We actually run their mapping worldwide in 60 different countries for all their territories. They have 2,500 gyms at this point in time and are growing rapidly. But the mapping we're using at the moment for schools, and we're likely to change it, but we'll only change it if it's an improvement or easier to deal with, is a derivative of Google Maps. So it all works pretty simply.
And the other question we had was also from Michael. By the way, Belinda has said, thank you for winning the prize. So that's great. Michael's asked, do you geocode the student locations at your end?
Okay, so there's two ways of geocoding. One, you can do it yourself and you'll have to go into every address and click on it with Google and then copy the geocode and get it all right, which will drive you pretty crazy if you've got to do 1,000 or 2,000. We have what's called geocoders. And a geocoder, we actually have to pay quite a bit, but that's okay. So for schools, we actually run the addresses through the geocoder. What the geocoder does, there is a major file in Australia. There is 9 or 10 million households that have an occupancy certificate. So every one of those households has a geocode. What the geocoder does is it matches that address. So if I go 25 Suffolk Road, Surrey Hills, it goes, there's 25 Suffolk Road, Surrey Hills in the national database, and bang, I've already got the geocode. Now the dot's on the map. So we can geocode 1,000, 2,000, 10,000 very quickly. And it's just the level of geocoding. Now, I must say, when someone hits us with 25,000 alumni, then we'll probably use a lower cost one because it's not so worried if it's in or out by 50 metres. When we're doing the school students and future students, we use the expensive one so we know it's right on the right dot. But that's just a bit of common sense then. Yeah. So that's what we use, is a geocoder, and we actually pay for that through our company, where we buy a lot of data called CallPoint. You wouldn't want to be trying to do it yourself.
No, it sounds like a very time-consuming task. Michael's also asked, and I'll let you reserve commercial privilege on the answer to this question, is which geocoding service do you use?
No, I just said we actually buy one, pay for one, and we buy credits. I think it costs me about $2,000 every few months, and we'll buy 50,000 credits or something of that nature, and we buy it through CallPoint. But CallPoint's just a small company, but this data set called the GNAF is this data set of the 10 million points. Now, that used to be something you could never get your hands on, but thank goodness to some of our governments have said that's ridiculous and made it publicly accessible. But you need to get a huge computer program and spend a lot of money to actually create your own geocoder. We're not going to do it, I can tell you now. So I just buy credits for the geocoding and let CallPoint do it for me.
Cool, excellent. Now we've got cameras off, and we're more than happy to answer any other questions. So if you'd like to use the little reactions button, you can put your hand up, or you can simply unmute. And if I see you unmuted, we'll invite you to ask a question. And also, of course, Peter is more than happy to take questions directly. The details are all over the Spectrum Analysis website, and you can, contact us here at any time. So are there any final questions? Doesn't look like there are, Peter. You must have answered.
Sorry, I've got one.
Michael? Yes, go for it, Michael.
Do you do any work for the government sector?
Look, very little at this stage, Michael, but not from just hasn't sort of happened. Government tend to do a fair bit themselves. I gather you're in some government position, but we're very happy to. There's no argument there, but let's just say independent schools have been our lifeline on this because they don't have anything else. The Catholic education has a bit of their own thing. I've talked to them, and probably they know they don't do the analysis levels that we do. And to be honest, on the actual government, haven't had that much experience with it. We've done other government projects over the years, don't get me wrong, but haven't really chased it at this point. But if you would like to have a discussion about something you're thinking about doing or want to have done or something, I'm most happy to do it. And in fact, I noticed you're from South Australia, and we're actually coming over for that Educate Plus conference in a few weeks, or whatever that is, a few weeks' time. So, happy to have a Zoom meeting or whatever you feel might be appropriate if you want to have a chat about something you've got in mind.
Peter, I was going to say, thank you, Michael. Peter, you might also like to mention the security things you've had to put in place to keep the data safe as a result of working with banks.
So a few schools get a bit iffy, and I know it's a government thing saying data should be held in Australia, and we are happy to support that. We are going to move probably to Amazon. They've got a Sydney server, but up till now we've used DigitalOcean, which is the third biggest, and their servers are in San Francisco. So there is this bit of a push to hold data in Australia, but believe me, it's not in China or anything like that. But DigitalOcean is one of the biggest ones in the world, and full American sort of security all over it. But we're even to the point some schools say to us, "Oh, we're a bit worried. We're sending you our data," and we'll say, "Well, look, upload it on this, put a password on it, and send us the password, or ring someone and tell them what the password is if they're even that, if they're that worried about it." And actually, when we send things across between ourselves, we have a password. So Belinda, who does a lot of our work, she's been full-time with me for 15 years, but now lives up in Casino. She and I are often sending updated presentations for schools, and we just have a password we use just to make sure we don't want anything getting away from us. So we're very conscious of it. And look, we may move to Amazon in Sydney if there's a need and people are worried about it, but at the moment it's DigitalOcean, which is one of the biggest in the world.
And you also had to do some security procedures for handling data for the finance industry as well.
Yeah, okay. We do the work for Aussie Home Loans, and Aussie Home Loans, as you probably know, were owned by CommBank up until recently. They've been sold to Lendy. So we had to get a clearance from CommBank to be allowed to deal with Aussie Home Loans, and even had to count how many locks you had to get through before you got from coming in our outside door till you got to where our server was, and even had to make sure the server was locked. Well, there were 3 doors you had to come through anyway, and then the server was locked as well. So I even wanted to know those sort of numbers. But we're comfortable with it. We run Trent Micro across our whole systems and always have. So I think we're as secure as, you can always do better, I guess, but I'd like to think we've got it pretty well covered.
Yeah, and Annabove is a real whiz on all things tech, and any question we ever need to ask, we just ask Annabove.
Annabove's our technical chief data scientist. He's been with me 15 years, and he drives that part. And then Van, she's my 3IC. She tends to do a lot of the school stuff, and she's been with us about 8 or 10 years now. So we don't change people too often, so we know what we've done. Which is quite funny because we just got back from the National Franchising Convention, and the number of times I'm talking to people who don't realise what's been done 5 years ago because everybody's left in a lot of cases.
Yeah, got that good long history there and stability.
Yeah.
Are there any final questions from anyone? No, I think that might be it, Peter. We're just over the... Yep.
Anybody who'd like to have some other chat, just give us a call, or we'll line up a Zoom. We're always doing demos for schools, and Zoom, showing something we can do, more one-to-one. But happy to take any chats you want to do.
And I've put a number of links in the chat, which I'll also share when we send out the recordings, so that if you'd like to explore any of the other bits and pieces of information, you can do that as well. So again, congratulations to St Ignatius College in Adelaide for winning the door prize. Thank you, Peter, and I think we can wrap up there.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thanks for attending. Take care.